everybody. It is Dr. Z here, AP European History. We are going to be talking about European history after Napoleon, and particularly some of the ideologies and concepts. This is going to be part one. So here's a reminder of Napoleonic Europe. Napoleon took over most of Europe. If you look at his campaigns and his battles, the Red Line, you can see sort of how far he moved into Europe. You look at the blue line, his allies. If you look at the beige areas, those are the dependent states. And then, of course, the green ones are the acquisitions. So he did create quite an empire in Europe. And this dismantled the status quo of European monarchies in their respect for boundaries. Particularly after, for example, the 30 Years' War. So after Napoleon comes a period that is dominated by the idea of conservatism. This is the belief in monarchy, tradition, Christianity, the gradual growth of states, not building large empires, rejection of Enlightenment ideas, right? We're blaming the French Revolution on the philosophes. We are afraid that some other empire is going to dismantle Europe once again. We want Europe to go back to the way that it was. We liked Europe after the 30 Years' War. We liked conservatism. We liked the monarchies and traditions. There are many examples of conservatism, and of course the Congress of Vienna is the big one, which we'll talk about. But also I wanted to point you in the direction of the Carlsbad Decrees. So in the German states, these were banning nationalist fraternities, okay, removing liberal university professors, expanding censorship in the press, quelling a growing sentiment for German nationhood. So this is an example of, a small example, well, large in the sense of German history, but, a smaller example of how conservatism can show up. The big example, though, of course, is the Congress of Vienna, dominated by the Austrian conservative minister Clemens von Metternich. They wanted to put Europe back together again, just like Humpty Dumpty, right? So to defend the monarchical status quo, Metternich is seen sort of like Hobbes. He doesn't think humans are good enough to rule themselves, that they're prone to error, excess, they're self-serving. Therefore, they need strong monarchy to keep them in line. And of course, the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars confirmed his fears, right? This is what happens when humans run amok, and there isn't a strong monarch there to keep everyone in order. Order, authoritarianism, this is sort of the way of the day, right? Aristocratic government was necessary to protect society from all this bad human behavior, right? That bad human behavior is shown in liberalism, right? Which caused the French and the American revolutions. We'll talk a lot more about what liberalism means. But really seeing that, that those bourgeois revolutionaries stirred up trouble among the lower classes, right? So we have to get back to, the conservative ideology is getting back to sort of the traditions of Europe, right? Organized religion. Christianity is a pillar of strong government to European nations, right? So Christian morality was seen as a bulwark against radical change. And liberalism would only bring aspirations of national independence, and this would bring down the Austrian Empire. So Metternich and his allies at the Congress of Vienna really were looking to use these conservative ideologies to build what was called a Congress system, okay, or the concert of Europe. You're going to see both of those terms. They mean just about the same thing. So this is putting Europe back together again after Napoleon. If we look at these two maps, right, we see the Napoleonic French Empire, the expand of it on the left, and then on the right, we see Europe, right, in the Congress system, putting Europe back together again. And France has its place there at the Congress of Vienna. And I know we've talked about the Congress of Vienna before, but, as we talk about conservatism and, the whole point of this chapter of your reading is all about these ideologies in the 19th century. So this is where we need to start. So they wanted to return Europe to its status, its ancien regime status, right? So how it was before the French Revolution. They did not bother to think about nationalist ideologies. They thought that liberal ideas caused revolution. So they tried to ignore a lot of that as much as possible, turning the clock back on liberalism and then on nationalism. But these are two major 19th century ideologies that are creeping up. So in 1915, them ignoring those ideologies end up causing quite a number of different things, lots of revolutions, and we'll get there and talk about that. So what were some of the goals? Treaty on France. France was seen as the belligerent nation because of Napoleon, right? Create that concert of Europe, which is the harmony between the countries of Europe so that there isn't going to be any more revolutions or wars or empires being built. Contain France, but preserve France as a great power, right? They don't want to eliminate France. They don't want to get rid of it. They think that that's not even really a possibility. And part of this is because the French had a very, very skilled foreign minister, Talleyrand. And he was there at the Congress of Vienna. He had a seat at the table. And I want you to keep that in mind because the Congress of Vienna really is a bookends to the Treaty of Versailles. And when the Versailles group got together after World War I, and they looked at the belligerent nation at the time, which was Germany, they did not let Germany have a seat at the table, right? And so that's sort of a huge difference between these two events and the way that European powers see themselves. And at the time, at the Congress of Vienna, Austria, Hungary, France, Great Britain were all led by powerful conservatives. They all wanted monarchy and protection from nationalism. So they sort of had the same goals as well. And Talleyrand helped them get to that point. So some of the results were restoring monarchies in France, in Spain, and also in Naples. We're also going to divide the rest of Europe, right? So people generally were upset with how they were now ruled by outsiders, though, right? Because this is the end of big European empires. But the people at the Congress of Vienna didn't really pay attention to that. So as a result of the Congress of Vienna, then the Dutch ruled the Belgians, the Austrians ruled Czechs, Slovaks, Hungarians, some Poles, people from Romania, Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia, and some Northern Italians. Russians and Prussians ruled the rest of Poles, but the Poles that were in Krakow they were free. That was just declared a free city. And as a precursor to the Soviet Union at this time, right? Of course, Soviet Union doesn't exist. This is still Russia. But the Russians then ruled the Finns, the Ukrainians, the Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians. Okay, and the Swedes ruled Norwegians, right? So lots of people in Europe were being ruled by people who lived far away, didn't speak their language, maybe didn't practice their religion. That's going to become a problem. Other long-term results, right? A lot of historians say, they call this the long 19th century, that this is 99 years of peace. Right, so if we go from 1815 to 1914, the beginning of World War I, 99 years, 7 generations of no major continental-wide conflicts. That's pretty huge. There's a number of smaller wars like the Franco-Prussian War, the Crimean War, and of course all of the revolutions in 1948 and the ones that came before then, but no huge continental war like the Napoleonic Wars or World War I. But the people were generally unhappy because they weren't being ruled in the way that they wanted to be. This idea of them ruling themselves wasn't really being paid attention to. They were being ruled by outsiders. But the Congress system did restore dynastic legitimacy, right? So all of those ruling families, the royal families all had power again. There was a balance of power between them. And it prevented any one country like France from wielding too much power. And out of it, 2 major alliances, the Holy and the Quintuple Alliance, are born. And these, of course, are causes of World War I as well. So the Quintuple Alliance is Austria, right? You see there in blue, Great Britain in white, okay? And Prussia and Russia, right? So Prussia here in green, right? And Russia. So that leaves part of the German Confederation, right, in the middle, and of course, France, okay? And then if we look at the Holy Alliance, right, we've got Prussia, Russia, and Austria here, right? We're starting to see a division. We're starting to see, Germany's in the middle, right? And we're starting to see a division in Europe, right? And so basically what a lot of historians say are these 2 alliances then are sort of setting up the sides for World War I. But in practice, the alliance system worked just fine. And kept Europe from attacking each other for about 100 years. They held periodic conferences. They just promised that they would aid each other in the case of any liberal or nationalist revolts. And this is why all of the nationalist revolutions that happened, almost all, are unsuccessful in Europe in the 19th century. And it worked at first, right? So some examples of how this worked, right, are not so great. Napoleon's liberal reforms were abolished in Portugal and the Papal States. The Inquisition was revived. Jews were further repressed. Liberals were fined and imprisoned in Russia, Prussia, and Austria. And freedom of expression was stifled at universities, for example, with the Carlsbad decrees, right? So this alliance system held up those conservative values that would help those monarchies maintain their authority, but also roll back a lot of freedoms that we associate with liberalism. And of course, there's also a bit more of a geographic split that starts to happen, right? These conservative monarchies have a lot more power in the South and the East, whereas more liberal governments are in the West, for example, Belgium and Great Britain. So folks say, revolutions did break out anyway, and we'll talk about those shortly. But for now, let's just talk about what is liberalism. This is a word I've been using here, right? You need to take out from your heads the idea of liberal and conservative today in America in the 21st century. This is the 19th century in Europe. Okay, so conservatism means we like monarchy. Liberalism means we like republics. So it's the belief in the freedom of the individual, the corruptibility of authority, enlightened ideas, the right to vote, civil liberties, legal equality, constitutional governments, parliamentary sovereignty, a free market economy. Government is best which governs least, right? So all of these sort of ideas that have been blossoming, you see a lot of enlightened ideas in there, right? That's a big part of where liberalism comes from. It was very popular among the bourgeoisie. It resulted in the attempts to abolish slavery in the British Empire, the movements for political rights of women, movements for prison reform, and also social welfare. And sort of an example that tells us quite a lot about liberalism and conservatism is the Corn Laws. And we talked a little bit about the Corn Laws in the past. So we remember that the aristocracy passed the Corn Laws in 1815, right, at the end of the Napoleonic Empire, the beginning of the Congress of Vienna. And during the war years, cheap wheat or corn, right, could not be imported from Eastern Europe. And this led to high prices for bread in Great Britain, large profits for landed aristocrats there. But when the war ends, wheat could be imported once again, bread prices go down, benefits everybody except for the landed aristocracy. So they put into place the new Corn Laws, right? This is more high tariffs on imported grain, and bread prices again go up. And your book says, seldom has a class legislated more selfishly for its own narrow economic advantage. And this leads to something called the Peterloo Massacre. So, of course, people were protesting the Corn Laws, and the Tory government responded by temporarily suspending the traditional rights of peaceable assembly. Right? They're like, you're protesting, we're going to ban protests. So in August 1819, 60,000 lower-class citizens gathered in St. Peter's Fields in Manchester to demand parliamentary reform. 18 were killed, 600 were wounded by government cavalry assaults. The government attacked its own people. This was called the Peterloo Massacre, right, in reference to the British victory at Waterloo. The Parliament then passed the Six Acts, further controlling the press and eliminating all mass meetings. So by 1838, the People's Charter, right, we remember this, they're asking for universal suffrage because they're workers. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people signed it. I mean, honestly, I think about 2 million people signed it, but don't quote me on that. Parliament rejected it 3 times, right, and thus it failed. So many working class people joined the Anti-Corn Law League. There was mass participation in Chartism, and this led to a liberal crusade, for this movement. So we see Parliament, right, and conservatism against liberalism, right, in the Anti-Corn Law League and Chartism. So this argued for lower food prices, more industrial jobs would happen if the Corn Laws were repealed. Ireland's potato crop fails. Famine prices for food seem likely in England. So finally they repealed the Corn Laws. Of course, Ireland did not escape famine, but this idea of laissez-faire economics would become sacred dogma in Great Britain. When we come back, we're going to talk about some other isms as well: socialism, communism, Marxism, things like that. Okay, see you then.